We are taught to admire the leader who never compromises, the saint with a scepter, honest, gentle, and unwaveringly kind. Machiavelli begins by puncturing that dream. He asks us to separate two kinds of goodness: the goodness that makes you admirable in private life and the goodness that keeps a community safe in public life. The first is about spotless motives and clean hands. The second is about stable outcomes in a world that does not reward naivety. When those two forms of goodness collide, the purely good leader, who refuses to see how power actually behaves, can become a hazard to the very people they hope to protect. This is why he insists on a cold vocabulary: necessity, virtu, fortuna. Necessity names the iron facts of the situation, the realities that do not care about our feelings, slogans, or self-image. Virtu is not virtue in the modern moral sense. It is skill, force of character, timing, the capacity to read incentives and act with precision. Fortuna is the weather of human affairs. Luck, timing, the swirl of contingency. A leader might be personally kind and pious, but if they lack virtu, they will be blown about by fortuna and punished by necessity. The world is full of wolves. It does not owe protection to the lamb who refuses to grow teeth. Machiavelli pushes us to ask a different moral question. Not, did the ruler remain pure, but did the people end up safer? Private goodness measures intention. Public goodness measures results. That shift is uncomfortable because it exposes the flimsiness of our favorite stories. We want good intentions to guarantee good outcomes, but politics runs on incentives, power balances, and reputations. If a leader signals that they will never punish betrayal, punishment becomes unnecessary. People will betray them for free. If they signal that property will always be respected, even in rebellion, then rebellion becomes a low-risk bet. The leader's personal sweetness can produce public bitterness. He therefore draws a line between image and effect. You can be gentle and cause chaos. You can be severe and produce peace. Machiavelli's heresy is simply to measure. Mercy that incubates disorder is not mercy to the honest citizen who suffers the disorder's costs. Firmness that deters violence can be mercy in disguise. He calls this cruelty well used, limited, targeted, and decisively executed at the outset to prevent a long season of bloodletting. The principle is surgical. Cut once, cleanly, and then stabilize. Do not nick 1,000 times and call it compassion. Consider how he treats reputation. Everyone tells leaders to be loved rather than feared, but he argues the real craft is to be predictably dangerous to the malicious and predictably safe to the decent. Love is fickle when it is not tied to expectations about enforcement and fairness. Fear, rightly understood, is not sadism. It is the community's confidence that promises and threats mean something. The leader's job is to make the rules visible and the consequences legible. If the boundary is clear and promptly enforced, most people will choose peace over opportunism, and the ruler will rarely need to be harsh at all. The brutal cost of goodness shows up when the boundary is smudged in the name of kindness and opportunists rush through the fog. Machiavelli's famous animals, the fox and the lion, give us a more vivid picture. The lion supplies force, the fox supplies cunning. A purely good leader tries to be neither and becomes prey. A purely forceful leader becomes clumsy and predictable. A purely cunning leader becomes untrustworthy. The art is to combine them: strength that can actually act, and intelligence that knows when not to. The fox keeps you from stepping into traps. The lion keeps the jackals from testing you every hour. What we call character in politics is often this combination of detection and deterrence, not a halo, but a stance. He also distinguishes between crises and normal times. In calm weather, a gentle hand can look like wisdom. Institutions carry the weight, norms coordinate behavior, and small defects don't snowball. In storms, the calculus changes. Hesitation compounds. A day's delay in suppressing a violent faction becomes a year of civil conflict. The purely good leader cannot bring themselves to stain their record with harsh action. The storm does not care, and the public pays. The lesson is not to love harshness, but to understand thresholds. Once a threat crosses a certain line, doing a little harm now prevents greater harm later. Historical examples sharpen this. The unarmed prophet who builds a movement on moral exhortation alone, the type Machiavelli warns about, can ignite enthusiasm in fair weather, but collapses when tested by organized opposition. By contrast, the leader who knows how to convert talent into institutions, loyalties into enforcement, and victories into durable arrangements leaves behind stability that outlasts their charisma. He praises leaders not for being angels, but for building structures that channel ordinary vices, ambition, fear, pride, into public safety rather than public ruin. The engineering is moral, even if the inputs are not. Appearance management, in this view, is not hypocrisy, but an instrument of order. People judge quickly and from the surface. The leader must curate signals. It is better to be truly reliable than theatrically benevolent. If you must choose, project consistency over niceness. Citizens will forgive unpleasant necessities if they are paired with predictability and shared rules. They will not forgive chaos delivered with a smile. The worst sin in Machiavelli's ledger is not severity. It is instability. There is also the problem of scale. In private life, you can absorb costs to remain pure. You forgive a debt, let a friend use you, accept an unfair burden. In public life, your costs are socialized. When a ruler lets it slide, the slide drags thousands with it. That is why Machiavelli is unsentimental about using exemplary punishment, a public act that recalibrates expectations and prevents many future abuses. The moral arithmetic changes when each decision is multiplied across a population. The idea of virtu returns here as a discipline of perception. A leader with virtu watches what people do, not what they say. They map incentives, they test loyalties, they set up systems where even the self-interested are guided into socially beneficial behavior. They also know when to yield to fortuna, when to pivot, retreat, or trade a short-term loss for long-term positioning. Purely good leaders often cling to a principle past its usefulness because abandoning it would feel like betrayal. Machiavelli says, "Be faithful to results, not to the flattery of your self-image." None of this glorifies cruelty. He condemns pointless violence, broken promises, and gratuitous humiliation because they destroy the very capital a ruler needs. Trust in the ruler's word, the sense that order is fair enough to live under, the belief that cooperation is safer than defection. The difference is that he roots these judgments in effects. A promise should be kept because dependable promises are the scaffolding of collective life. Break one only when the other party has voided the contract, and keeping it would endanger the whole structure. Mercy should be shown because reconciliation is cheaper than constant repression. Deny it only when it will be interpreted as permission for further harm. Translated into the routines of leadership, the counsel is practical. Set expectations in advance. Tie rewards to performance and penalties to clear breaches. Act early. Timeliness is more humane than escalation. Keep punishments limited, public, and final. Do not dangle vague threats or wage slow, grinding vendettas. Make a few carefully chosen examples and then return quickly to normalcy so people can plan their lives. Be accessible to grievances so that private injuries do not fester into public rebellions. And cultivate capable lieutenants whose reputations for fairness and resolve extend your own. The sting in Machiavelli's thought is that he treats goodness as something fragile that must be guarded by competence. If you want justice, you must be able to compel it. If you want peace, you must be able to frighten those who profit from disorder. If you want to be merciful, you must deter predators from forcing you into constant defense. The purely good leader imagines that moral warmth radiates outward and converts rivals. The Machiavellian leader knows that moral warmth must be wrapped in a casing that does not melt under pressure. This is the hidden architecture beneath the myth of the purely good leader. Private virtue adorns the person. Public virtue protects the realm. Keeping those books properly balanced is not cynicism. It is fidelity to the lives that depend on your decisions. Mercy sounds like an unqualified good until you measure its effects. Machiavelli asks us to keep a ledger, not of sentiments, but of consequences. Did this act of mercy reduce harm for the many, or did it license predation? Likewise with harshness. We recoil from cruelty, but he distinguishes cruelty that is purposeless, repeated, and self-indulgent from cruelty that is limited, targeted, and used once to prevent a long season of violence. The first corrodes legitimacy. The second, paradoxically, can be the more humane path because it shortens suffering and clarifies the rules everyone must live under. The critical variable is sequence. Disorder compounds, so does enforcement. Early, decisive action against serious breaches often spares a society from 1,000 small punishments later. Delay changes the moral arithmetic. If you refuse to act when a faction begins to terrorize its neighbors because you want to be seen as gentle, you convert what might have been a single sharp intervention into a chronic policy of repression. Gentle at the start, cruel in the end. Machiavelli's counsel is surgical. Remove a tumor early, under controlled conditions, rather than allow metastasis that makes the eventual operation barbaric. He gives us a way to price mercy. Mercy that is paired with restitution, disarmament, or verifiable compliance can be socially cheap. It trades punishment for a credible guarantee of future safety. Mercy with no conditions becomes a subsidy for future harm. The opportunist's calculus is simple. If breaking the rule carries little cost and success brings reward, more people will try it. In this ledger, leniency without deterrence is not kindness to victims, it is an invisible tax on them. The moral question shifts from "did we forgive?" to "whom did our forgiveness make vulnerable?" Cruelty must be priced as well. Harshness can buy deterrence, but only under strict design. It must be fast, predictable, and bounded. Fast because lingering threats produce anxiety and panic responses. Predictable because arbitrariness forces everyone into defensive aggression. Bounded because open-ended severity destroys the hope that makes compliance rational. The harsh act should have a sunset. The message should be, cross this line and you will face X, but if you stop, the punishment stops. Without the sunset, fear ceases to deter and begins to radicalize. Reputation is the compound interest on both mercy and cruelty. Once a ruler earns a reputation for impunity, no meaningful consequences for betrayal, each subsequent decision grows more expensive. More actors will test the boundary, and each new test is harder to handle than the last. Conversely, a reputation for clean, even-handed enforcement makes future punishment rarer because most people decide not to roll the dice. The best cruelty, in Machiavelli's terms, is the kind you almost never have to use because its possibility is credible and its application is known to be fair. Historical illustrations clarify the pattern. A leader inherits a lawless province. If she tolerates extortion and street violence to avoid appearing oppressive, crime syndicates entrench. Citizens arm themselves. Rival militias form. The eventual crackdown, inevitable because disorder threatens the state's survival, requires raids, curfews, mass detentions. Her initial gentleness created the conditions that forced a much harsher policy. Flip the sequence. She deploys a firm, targeted campaign at once, disarms the most violent actors, and publicizes a clear amnesty for those who desist, and a predictable penalty for those who persist. Violence drops. Regular life resumes. The initial shock is remembered, its repetition is unnecessary. Designing clemency becomes a craft. Mercy should be public enough to signal the regime's preference for reconciliation, but conditional enough to protect the innocent. Typical instruments: time-limited amnesties tied to surrendering weapons, sentence reductions paired with restitution to victims, reintegration programs that require monitored compliance, credible threats reserved for repeat or egregious offenses. Mercy then functions as an invitation to rejoin the social contract, not a coupon for continued abuse. Humiliation ruins the calculus. Machiavelli is not counseling sadism. Even when punishment is necessary, humiliation is corrosive because it forces enemies to fight for dignity rather than interest. A punished rival who keeps his honor can make a deal tomorrow. One who has been shamed will burn the house down because there is nothing left to lose. The ledger must therefore track dignity as a strategic resource, keep punishments proportional, specific to acts rather than identities, and free of cruelty that exists only to gratify a ruler's vanity. Institutions translate these principles into routines so they do not depend on a heroic individual. Clear laws, transparent procedures, and swift courts reduce the need for theatrical punishments. Predictable policing prevents the perception that rules are tools for personal enemies. Appeals processes protect the innocent, which in turn preserves legitimacy, which in turn reduces the frequency of force. Mercy can be institutionalized too. Standardized pardons for first offenses, restorative justice mechanisms, built-in review periods. The point is to make both severity and leniency legible, so no one mistakes caprice for policy. The same ledger governs smaller worlds. In a company, leniency toward a star performer who poisons the team signals that output beats integrity, and soon output declines because trust collapses. A single, well-communicated termination for egregious behavior can create a safer culture than months of coaching that never resolves the harm. In a classroom, a teacher who never enforces deadlines punishes diligent students by allowing free riders to set the pace. One decisive boundary, missed work requires structured remediation, raises the tide for everyone. In online communities, moderators who act early against brigading and doxing with narrow, transparent bans preserve speech better than those who let harassment metastasize and then impose sweeping restrictions that hurt everyone. Timing matters more than intensity. Late punishment must be harder to have the same effect because violators have already invested in defiance and socialized their risk through networks. Early punishment can be lighter because it is dealing with isolated acts that have not yet become identity. This is why Machiavelli warns against tolerating small violations. Small violations are rehearsals for bigger ones. A quick, proportionate response de-escalates by making further escalation look irrational. There is also the question of selection. The target of severity should be those who specialize in harming the common life, not convenient scapegoats. Punishing the visible but harmless to look strong, harassing minor offenders while leaving major predators untouched, destroys the credibility of the ledger. People will read the signal correctly. The rules are for the weak. Effective severity is almost always elite constraining before it is mass constraining. That is, it binds the powerful first, so the less powerful can trust the rules. Machiavelli implies a 5-part test before using harshness. What concrete harm are we preventing? What is the minimum effective measure? Will the community understand the rule being enforced? Is there a clear exit ramp for compliance? Are the innocent protected in process and outcome? If you cannot answer these, your harshness will likely multiply enemies without increasing safety. A parallel test for mercy. Has the harm ceased? Are victims repaired? Will mercy be read as fairness rather than weakness? Is there monitoring to catch renewed violations? Without these, your leniency will be rented by predators as operating capital. We should note the compounding costs of permanent severity. A regime that can only govern by fear must constantly perform fear. The performance is expensive in money, talent, and attention. Talent flees, money hides. Attention is consumed by policing rather than building. Cruelty, ill-used, in Machiavelli's phrase, is repetitive and expanding. The circle of the punished widens as trust narrows. Finally, the ruler stands on a shrinking island of enforcers who no longer believe in anything but their own survival. The ledger turns red even if the streets are quiet. But severity cannot be replaced by rhetoric. Rules without teeth invite rule by personality, which always ends in either clientelism or chaos. The path is neither mawkish leniency nor theatrical brutality. It is credible consistency. Citizens must be able to say, if I do X, Y happens, and see that this is true whether or not they are liked by the ruler. When that belief exists, mercy can be generous, because it is not mistaken for surrender. When it does not, every pardon is a signal to predators to accelerate. There is a subtlety in forgiveness. Private forgiveness can be unconditional, public forgiveness cannot. In public roles, forgiveness must be integrated with prevention. You do not hold a grudge, you hold a line. A ruler might feel no hatred toward a rebel leader and still imprison him, not because vengeance is sweet, but because his release would make new deaths likely. Likewise, after a period of order, the ruler may release him under guarantees precisely to teach that the state prefers ordinary life to perpetual punishment and that reconciliation is cheaper than surveillance when the threat has passed. Strategic communication ties the ledger together. Announce the rule before enforcing it. Announce the amnesty before ending it. Explain who is being punished and why, and what will end the punishment. Explain who is being spared and why, and what will void that clemency. Ambiguity is a tax on the honest because they overestimate risks and withdraw from public life, while the reckless underestimate risks and expand. Clarity reverses the tax. The honest re-enter, the reckless recalculate. Finally, the ledger must count invisible goods: sleep, routine, the ability to plan. Mercy that preserves these is good. Severity that restores these is justified. Any policy that destroys them without necessity is failure. The ruler's task is to make the cost of predation higher than the thrill, and the reward of cooperation higher than the temptation, so that most people can stop thinking about politics and return to their lives. Being too good in ordinary life is rarely a dramatic moral failure. It is a slow leak. You give a harmless yes here, a minor exception there, and discover that your days are no longer yours. Machiavelli's insight applies even without thrones. If you will not protect your time, energy, and standards, someone else will spend them. Chronic agreeableness invites an economy of exploitation. Small favors become expectations, expectations become entitlements, and your kindness is recategorized as a resource for others to allocate. The bill arrives as fatigue, resentment, and the uneasy knowledge that you are reliable for everyone except yourself. The first move is to shift from intention to outcomes. You meant to be kind. Did the situation become fairer or merely more convenient for the pushiest person? You meant to be helpful. Did the group learn to respect the process or to root around it by appealing to your softness? When goodness is measured by effect, it becomes obvious that unclear boundaries are not ethically neutral. They redistribute costs to the conscientious and rewards to the opportunistic. A polite person with no lines is like a city with beautiful gates and no walls. Lovely to visit, easy to sack. Think in terms of incentives rather than stories. People respond to what is rewarded, allowed, and ignored. If lateness always meets accommodation, lateness will grow. If scope creep on a project buys a better outcome with no extra cost, you will live in permanent scope creep. If you cushion every consequence, you are underwriting future harm. This is not cynicism, it is maintenance. You don't despise human nature, you design for it. You assume that even good people take the path of least resistance and that your job is to make the right path the easier path. Reputation is your quiet police force. The reputation you want is not nice at any cost, but kind by default, firm by principle. That combination deters casual misuse without hardening you into suspicion. You cultivate it through early signals and consistent follow-through. A single, calm enforcement at the first serious breach changes more behavior than 10 heartfelt lectures. People learn you are safe to approach and impossible to push. Counterintuitively, this makes you more helpful because you're not busy undoing messes created by your previous leniencies. Boundary setting feels rude because we mistake it for a negative act. It is more accurate to see it as pre-commitment to a fair order. You are not saying no to people, you are saying yes to a system in which favors don't cannibalize obligations. The cleanest technique is to state rules, not moods. I don't work weekends. I don't start unpaid pilots. I don't lend money to friends. I gift small amounts or not at all. I don't take calls without an agenda. I don't hold information that belongs to the team. Rules reduce debate because they convert each request from a personal negotiation into a known policy. Policies also protect relationships. You can decline without turning the person into an antagonist. Sequence matters as much as content. If you are firm early, you can be generous later. If you are generous early, you will be forced into harshness later. This mirrors Machiavelli's distinction between cruelty well used and cruelty that festers. Translate it personally. When a new collaboration starts, set the operating system in the first meeting. Deadlines, communication channels, decision rights, escalation paths, what done looks like. Enforce the first missed boundary in a way that is visible, proportionate, and final. The goal is not to humiliate, but to make the line real. Once the norms are internalized, you will rarely need to refer to them again. There is a discipline for interventions: calm, concrete, and closed. Calm, no anger, it rewards drama. Concrete, name the behavior, the impact, and the rule. We agreed on 24-hour responses. The last 3 times it took a week. That stalls the client and risks the account. Closed, specify the consequence and the next check-in. If we miss the next response window, I'll reassign client comms to Jordan and refocus you on production. We'll review Friday. This prevents the endless, confusing middle zones, soft scolding with no endpoint, that drain everyone's patience and teach no one anything. Conditional mercy is the humane engine of your personal politics. People make mistakes. You want a culture where a first miss is a lesson, not a scarlet letter. But mercy must be paired with verifiable change. Offer repair. We can still hit the milestone if you cover the late QA and document the workflow so the team isn't blocked again. Tie it to a time box and a future audit. Mercy without terms reads as weakness. Mercy with terms reads as fairness. The message is simple. Reconciliation is cheaper than punishment, and accountability is the price of reconciliation. Your time is the treasury. Guard it with budgets, not wishful thinking. Make recurring blocks for deep work and treat them as meetings with someone important, because they are. Cap emergency slots per week so other people's urgency doesn't become your calendar's constant weather. Batch low-stakes favors into office hours. Happy to help. Drop it into my Tuesday, Thursday 30-minute window. You remain accessible while preventing your day from dissolving into confetti. Language is leverage. Replace apologetic hedging with neutral policies. Instead of, "I'm so sorry, I don't think I can," use, "I'm not available for that scope. Here are 2 options that fit." Instead of, "I feel uncomfortable," use, "That's outside our agreed workflow. To proceed, we'd need a change order." "I can't" invites debate about your capacity. "I don't," and "we require" points to a rule. The goal is to remove your worth as the battleground and place the system at the center. Practice the rule of 3 before escalating. The first breach gets a reminder and a restatement of the norm. The second breach gets a consequence that adjusts incentives: reduced access, reallocation of duties, a fee, a deadline moved earlier. The third breach ends the arrangement or moves it to a different structure where the risk is contained. You are not punishing, you are acknowledging data. Patterns, not promises, decide. Design elite constraints in your small kingdoms. In teams and friendships alike, people watch how you treat the powerful, the star performer, the long-time friend, the high-status client. If your boundaries only bind the conscientious while the star gets exemptions, your culture will rot. Flip it. Hold your favorites to the standard first. It signals that rules are not tools of preference. Morale rises because everyone sees that safety is not negotiable and excellence is not an excuse. Do not confuse performative toughness with actual deterrence. Barking, sarcasm, and power plays generate compliance in the moment and sabotage trust later. Real deterrence is boring. Clear agreements, calendar reminders, documented decisions, consequences that happen quietly and exactly as advertised. The more routine your enforcement, the less often you'll need it. Theatricality is a symptom of earlier failures to set the stage. Credit is a boundary too. Overgiving credit to avoid jealousy can be a kind of cowardice. Undergiving credit breeds resentment. Tie credit to contribution in public and correct the record gently when narratives drift. This was Maya's design. I led the rollout. Done consistently, this protects the diligent and starves the status games that thrive in ambiguity. It also deters the common exploit, attaching to your work after the fact to siphon recognition. Money clarifies what words blur. If a favor grows past its original scope, price it. Happy to continue. At this point it's consulting, and my rate is X. The serious will refine their ask or pay. the unserious will evaporate. Pricing is not greed, it is a boundary written in numbers. Similarly, pre-write your change order templates and use them. Each time you improvise, you open a negotiation where the other party's incentive is to erode your floor. In families and friendships, boundaries must be paired with warmth so they don't land as rejection. The formula is affection plus limit plus alternative. I love hearing from you. I don't do late-night calls. Let's talk Sunday afternoon. I want to help with the move. I can give 2 hours on Saturday and bring boxes. You show you care, you draw the line, and you present a door that is actually open. People who value you will walk through it. People who valued only your compliance will complain. The distinction is information you can use. Expect backlash the first time you change the script. Systems resist reconfiguration, especially those that benefited from the old you. Don't moralize the pushback. Normalize it. I know I used to say yes to this. Here's what I'm doing differently now. Repeat once, then act. If you argue feelings, you'll get trapped in loops about intent and loyalty. If you act according to a new standard, eventually the system updates or it exits. Guard against two traps, the martyr and the cynic. The martyr hoards tasks to prove goodness and secretly resents everyone for letting them. The cynic hardens after a few burns and stops trusting anyone. Both distort reality. Most people are neither predators nor saints. They are responsive to structure. Build structures. Assume decency. Design for opportunism and verify through behavior. You will be pleasantly surprised more often than you are disappointed. Make friends with the fox and the lion. The fox notices patterns, who forgets to include you until decisions are made, who volunteers you in absentia, who uses charm in place of commitment. The lion supplies the spine to interrupt, correct, and, when needed, exit. Fox work happens in notebooks and calendars. Lion work happens in sentences like, "No, that won't work for me," and "We agreed otherwise." Together, they protect your capacity for generosity so it can be spent where it matters. When you must deliver a hard no, keep it short. Long explanations furnish ammunition for counter-arguments and imply that your no is provisional. A 3-beat template suffices: appreciation, boundary, path. Thanks for thinking of me. I'm not taking on extra projects this quarter. If it helps, here's a short list of people who might be a fit. Respectful, final, and still helpful. Over time, people will come to you with better-shaped requests because you trained them. Document decisions. Memory is political, even among friends. Recap agreements in a short message. We're aligned. Delivery by the 15th. 2 rounds of revisions, then final payment. Documentation is not distrust, it is friction reduction. When the deadline arrives, you can point to the note instead of arguing about what was understood. This habit neutralizes the classic exploit of strategic amnesia. Keep a tiny repertoire of proportionate consequences ready so enforcement isn't improvisational. Missed deadline, earlier internal deadline next cycle, unprepared meeting, removal from that decision forum until prep improves. Repeated boundary testing, move communication to written channels only, casual insults, end the conversation and reschedule with an agenda. The point is not severity, it is predictability. You want people to feel the floor under their feet, even when it moves them. Finally, build an abundance that makes kindness safe. The best defense against being too good is to have enough. Enough savings that you can walk from bad deals. Enough skill that you don't fear scarcity. Enough relationships that you're not hostage to one gatekeeper. Enough self-respect that pleasing someone is not your oxygen. Machiavelli would call this virtù, the capacity to navigate reality without flinching. With it, you can afford to be gracious because you can afford to be firm. You can say yes with a clear heart because your no is credible. Your goodness stops being a discount other people apply and becomes a gift you choose to give. Modern goodness survives by fusing conscience with competence, a two-handed morality where one hand offers, the other guards. Conscience without competence turns into hostage-taking by the shameless. Competence without conscience becomes machinery for private gain. The balance begins with a vow. Measure your goodness by the safety and dignity it produces for others, not by how morally radiant you feel. Then build the engineering that makes those outcomes repeatable, even when luck shifts and pressure rises. Start with a map, not a manifesto. List the actors in your arena, the resources they control, the incentives that move them, and the reputations they fear losing. Add the terrain, deadlines, choke points, legal constraints, public expectations, the rhythms of the calendar. Good policies fail when they assume saints. Good systems assume people respond to trade-offs. If you want cooperation, make cooperation cheaper than defection. If you want honesty, make honesty less risky than silence. If you want mercy to work, pair it with a lock that keeps predators from treating your mercy like venture capital. Set non-negotiables before setting goals. Non-negotiables are the lines you won't trade for convenience. No secrecy about rules, no punishment without a clear charge, no elite exemptions, no humiliation as theatre, no perpetual emergencies. Then set goals in plain, countable terms, fewer late payments, safer streets by 11 p.m., response times under 24 hours, grievance resolution within 7 days. Goodness that can't be audited becomes a story. Goodness you can count becomes culture. Make consequences visible and finite. Visibility deters. Finitude civilizes. People should know in advance the ladder. Warning, loss of privilege, penalty, exit, each step tied to specific behaviors and time-limited. Build exit ramps into every penalty. What compliance looks like, how long it lasts, who confirms completion. Nothing radicalizes like endless punishment with no way back. Likewise, nothing encourages opportunism like penalties that never arrive. Mercy needs architecture. Announce amnesties before you enforce and tie them to verifiable actions. Return the goods, disclose the conflict, complete the training, compensate the victim, sign the code of conduct, accept monitoring for a period. Document the terms in a neutral template so mercy isn't misread as favoritism. Reserve unconditional forgiveness for private life. In public roles, forgiveness without prevention is abdication. Put constraints on the powerful first. This single move, binding insiders before outsiders, changes everything. Publish your own calendars, disclose your conflicts, submit your expenses for review, take the worst shifts occasionally, rotate privileges. When the visible winners live under the rules gain moral credit with everyone else. When they don't, no amount of messaging will persuade the middle to cooperate. Elite constraints turn fairness from rhetoric into atmosphere. Design for early action. Everything compounds. Disorder, resentment, rumor, courage. Intervene at the first meaningful breach with calm specificity and proportionate weight. This violates Clause 3. Here's the record, here's the remedy, here's when we'll review. That sentence, delivered once and consistently, prevents 10 messes later. Delay is expensive because you will be negotiating with a crowd instead of an individual and with identities instead of actions. Treat communication as infrastructure, not decoration. Before enforcing, publish the rule in language ordinary people use, with examples and edge cases. What counts, what doesn't, who decides, how to appeal, and how quickly. After enforcing, publish the rationale without glee or vagueness. Silence breeds rumor, contempt breeds resistance, opacity breeds fantasy. Clarity rewards the conscientious and forces the reckless to calculate. Replace motivational speeches with default settings. Defaults move behavior quietly. Meetings that auto-end at 45 minutes. Processes that require 2 signatures for large changes. Comment windows that close unless renewed. Community channels that mute first-time posters until they read the guidelines. Contracts that convert scope creep into paid work automatically. Defaults let people glide into good behavior. They save heroics for real emergencies. Build legitimacy on 4 pillars and check them regularly. Necessity was action required to protect the common life. Proportionality was the smallest effective measure used. Verifiability, could a neutral outsider see the facts? And reversibility, can we unwind if we're wrong? If any pillar fails, your goodness will start to taste like power to those on the receiving end. Repair quickly and publicly. Apologies are cheaper than bitterness. Handle Fortuna by creating slack and options. Luck punishes systems with no buffer. Keep a reserve of time, money, and talent so you never enforce harshly just because you're out of other tools. Split critical functions so a single failure doesn't cascade. Run pre-mortems. Imagine this collapses in 6 months. How did it happen? And fix the top 3 vulnerabilities now. Optionality is moral because it prevents desperate measures that would harm innocence. Avoid performative toughness and performative empathy. Both are substitutes for design. Performative toughness uses fear to mask poor architecture. Performative empathy uses warmth to avoid decisions. Competence sounds boring. Service-level agreements, escalation charts, stewardship rotations, audit trails, sunset clauses, randomized spot checks, published metrics. Boring prevents blood. In digital spaces, make the platform do the work. Auto-slow threads when toxicity spikes require first-time contributors to acknowledge the rules before posting. Downrank content under verified review instead of deleting it in silence. Rate limit brigades by capping new account reach. Archive decision rationales in a public ledger. Ban sparingly, but ban resolutely for targeted harassment and coordinated deception, and publish the criteria so enforcement cannot be sold as censorship by those who profit from chaos. Your kindness is your moderation cue, not your tolerance for abuse. In workplaces, codify fairness so it survives turnover. Role clarity reduces the politics that prey on the kind. Promotion rubrics, compensation bans, conflict of interest disclosures, rotating committees, blind review stages where feasible, and post-mortems that name failures without shaming people. These are the levers that let generosity flow without being hijacked. When standards are legible, the agreeables stop being targets, and the disagreeables stop being necessary for truth-telling. In communities and cities, consider dignity as a budget line. Collect fines, yes, but cap the ruinous spiral that turns a small offence into a lifetime of fees. Use graduated sanctions and restorative options where possible. Reserve incapacitation for those who cannot or will not stop harming others. The message should be, we want you back, not under us. People return to the table faster when you protect their face while you protect your neighbours. In families, make warmth the default and limits the rails. Bedtimes are for children's brains, not parental authority. Chore charts are for competence, not obedience. Apologies model repair, not weakness. When a rule breaks, respond like a small institution. Name the breach, name the consequence, name the next chance. Offer choices inside boundaries to grow agency. This is Machiavellian in the old sense, shaping character with structures that teach reality without breaking spirit. In negotiations, anchor your goodness in BATNAs, not vibes. A credible alternative to agreement, another vendor, another partner, a slower timeline, prevents predatory bargains that would later force you into harsh enforcement. Put deadlines in writing, specify acceptance criteria, predefine how disputes are escalated and who pays for delays. When the playing field is clear, kindness can take the form of creative concessions without becoming subsidy for bad faith. Adopt a cadence that keeps the system honest. Weekly metrics for the essentials, monthly risk review, quarterly sunlight, public report of infractions and outcomes, annual red teaming where outsiders test for capture and bias. Publish misses as well as hits and the correction steps you're taking. Transparency is not just moral floss, it's a moat. Predators hunt where darkness lets stories outbid facts. Watch language. Replace purity words with reliability words. Not, we are compassionate no matter what, but we are compassionate within a framework that keeps everyone safe. Not, we trust our people, but we trust our process and we improve it when it fails our people. Not zero tolerance, which invites performative crackdowns, but known consequences applied consistently. Words commit you to designs, choose ones you can keep. Guard against two corruptions of good causes, the emergency that never ends and the leader who becomes the cause. Time limit extraordinary powers and require supermajority renewals. Rotate roles so no office becomes an identity. Separate treasury from charisma, separate adjudication from advocacy. The system should survive your best person leaving and your worst person arriving. If it cannot, your goodness is a personality cult waiting to disappoint. Keep a small court of skeptics. Give 3 people license to challenge you privately on necessity, proportionality, verifiability, and reversibility. Reward the criticism you least want to hear. The ego's comfort is the enemy of the public's safety. Invite discomfort on schedule so it doesn't arrive as scandal by surprise. Practice reputational minimalism, promise less, deliver precisely, repeat. Predictable fairness compounds into goodwill. Flashy promises compound into cynicism. When a breach forces a severe response, let your history do the talking. People forgive hardness from a hand known for steadiness more readily than they forgive softness that turns into panic. Carry a personal code card you could hand to an adversary without shame. Begin with benevolence. State the rule before you enforce. Constrain myself before I constrain others. Act early at the smallest effective dose. Protect dignity while protecting safety. Make the exit visible. Audit myself in public at set intervals. Repair harms faster than I defend my image. Step down when the office needs someone else. This is Virtu translated. Not goodness as performance, but goodness as repeatable craft. Finally, remember what the ledger is supposed to protect. The quiet goods that make life livable. Sleep that isn't shattered by dread. Routines that hold. The freedom to plan a month ahead. Children who can play without learning the politics of fear too soon. Adults who can disagree without arming themselves first. Modern goodness earns these by making decency easy and predation expensive, by giving mercy a backbone and justice a human face, by treating power as a tool on behalf of ordinary days.